there have been 17 Republican presidential debates. Some of them, it's the most successful reality TV show on cable television this year, okay, in terms of audiences. And in some of them, the candidates have talked about China a little bit. Taiwan has come up just once. Governor Rick Perry from Texas brought it up in connection with the decision by President Obama to not sell the most advanced F-16 fighter jets to Taiwan. Governor Perry, of course, comes from Texas where those jets would have been manufactured. He brought it up. That isn't how it's always been. Back in the 1950s, Taiwan and the outlying islands were very much in the American news and very much in American political discussion. This has to do, of course, with Jinmen, the island just off the Chinese coast, where Taiwanese and mainland forces exchanged rockets as well as propaganda. On the left side, you see a propaganda poster calling on the people from the mainland to liberate Taiwan. And then we have a propaganda poster on the right from Taiwan calling on people on the mainland to revolt against Mao. One example of Taiwan being central to American political considerations comes in 1960. So 52 years ago, when Richard Nixon and John Kennedy were debating, Taiwan was at the center of 3 of the 4 debates. It was the most hotly contested issue, and it had to do with the American defense perimeter and American commitments to that particular region. Times have changed. Today, China and Taiwan no longer exchange bombardments. There's still a good deal of propaganda back and forth, but the main thing going on is trade, enormous amounts of trade. In the first 10 months of last year, the two-way trade between China and Taiwan totaled $108 billion. By far, China is Taiwan's most important trade partner. You can see the statistics here. And China's been Taiwan's top trade partner since 2003. Now, if you look at the share of Taiwan's trade with the mainland, you can see that almost 1 out of 4 items is exchanged with the mainland. 22% of Taiwan's trade is with China, 12% with Japan, 11% with the United States. In terms of exports, China is even more important. China absorbs 27% of all the goods Taiwan exports. Things have definitely changed in the 52 years since Richard Nixon and John Kennedy debated whether or not the United States could go to war over Jinmen. But it's not just goods, people. People from Taiwan have been traveling to the mainland for a long time. But in recent years, tourists from the mainland have been going to China. 1.6 million of them last year. Here we've got one taking a picture in front of Taipei 101. And the first individual tourists started going this past summer. And they were greeted with this honorary welcoming certificate. So there's a lot of trade, there's a lot of contact. You know, for example, that there was even a fellow on the mainland who, in conjunction with this recent election in Taiwan, who tried to find a way to float his way over to Jinmen so he could take part. There's a lot of interest on the mainland in what happened. Now, a little bit more, about 2 years ago, CNN asked a representative sample of Americans, what should America do? Should the United States take a strong stand so that China does not seize Taiwan, or should the United States work primarily to forge good relations with China? And you can see a majority of Americans said, take a strong stand. Now you know that that's not American foreign policy. We take no such stand. Maintain good relations was high on the priority list as well. This is the context in which this election took place and in which U.S. Taiwan, U.S. China relations proceeds. A little bit less than 2 years ago, the Chicago Council on World Affairs conducted a survey, and only 1 out of 5 Americans thought that a China-Taiwan confrontation represented a critical threat for the United States. Only 1 out of 5. And that's the statistic here that I want to draw your attention to. For most Americans, Taiwan is the source of all sorts of wonderful products. Most Americans don't think about Taiwan in connection with conflict with China. In fact, in a survey like this, where they asked specifically about Taiwan, only 1 out of 5. But given a longer list of choices, only 1 out of 20 Americans thinks that conflict with China would be produced by some issue pertaining to Taiwan. Most Americans don't think about cross-strait relations. The people on Taiwan think about it a lot. This election was partly about that. One reason they think so much about it is because people on the mainland think about it as well. And people on the mainland think, 2 out of 3 of them, that if there is going to be a violent conflict with the United States, that the source of that conflict would be Taiwan, would be conflict over Taiwan. So why pay attention to election 2012? Because it matters. It certainly matters for the 23 million people in Taiwan. They've chosen a new government. They've made important decisions. But it matters too to the relationship with the mainland and the relationship that those places have with the United States. Well, here are the results for the presidential election. On the left, you have the results from 2008. The blue areas are those counties that were carried by Ma Ying-jeou, the representative of the Kuomintang Party. Ma Ying-jeou's victory in 2008 returned power to the Kuomintang. The Kuomintang had held power for 50 years following their retreat from the mainland to Taiwan. In 2000, they were defeated by Chen Shui-bian and the Democratic Progressive Party, who ruled for 8 years. And so you can see that in 2008, you have a very clear geographic breakdown. The north, very much in Kuomintang hands. The south, in DPP, Democratic Progressive Party, hands. And then on the right, we have this Saturday's results. And you can see here that one area up in the north, Yilan County, a majority of those votes went for the Democratic Progressive Party candidate. And there were some smaller areas in the south that were recovered by the Democratic Progressive Party. You can see by comparing the vote totals that the election was a good deal narrower this time than it was in 2008. This is an important point because this time, of course, we had a third-party candidate as well. In terms of turnout, many more Taiwanese go to the polls than Americans. 3 out of 4 eligible voters in Taiwan voted, about 75%. That's really quite astonishing, unless you compare it to earlier elections in Taiwan when the turnout was even greater. Here are the candidates, and here's an advertisement for Ma Ying-jeou, very much as he wanted to be depicted, as upright, as straightforward. And here you have a testimonial that there's nothing good that comes from being Ma Ying-jeou's friend. You don't get special favors. You don't get that sort of treatment. Ma Ying-jeou, of course, has been president for 4 years. Prior to that, he was mayor of Taipei and held other important positions in government. Tsai Ing-wen represented the Democratic Progressive Party. She, too, is a political veteran. She served in the Chen Shui-bian administration. Among other positions, she was the head of the Mainland Affairs Council. She, like Ma Ying-jeou, was educated partly in the United States. She took a master's degree at Cornell. Ma Ying-jeou studied at Harvard University. Tsai Ing-wen subsequently went to London, where she earned a PhD. Here, she's depicted as caring. Okay, that's, of course, a central message. And then we had James Soong. James Soong, of course, is the man who could have been president had other decisions been made earlier in this century. In 2000, he finished in second in the presidential race. He received 36% of the vote when Chen Shui-bian received 39%. He's the former governor of Taiwan province. He's the former head of the Government Information Office. Deep experience in government, very much tied to the Kuomintang, but then breaking away as a third-party candidate in 2000, and then moving back and working with the Kuomintang in 2004. In 2012, he ran as the head of the People First Party. And he said that he wanted to have a government that was responsive and responsible. Those are the candidates. What are the key issues? The other members of the panel may disagree with me on some of these things. The key issues were primarily economics and cross-strait relations. And it's impossible really to separate these out. They are completely intertwined. The general space, or the center in Taiwan politics, has expanded dramatically in the last 10, 12 years. And there's greater appreciation on all sides for the importance of a good economic relationship with the mainland. And so this was very much in evidence in this campaign. Although there were quite contentious issues, it was a fairly calm campaign. Some political analysts in Taiwan described it as a cold one, that it lacked fireworks, it lacked the excitement. Many people believe that that represents the maturing of the Taiwan political system. That no longer do people think that democracy is a one-time thing. They'll try hard, they'll try to win this time, but if not, there will be another time. They're getting more and more comfortable with the democratic system. So you can see among the issues, economic performance and prospects, social equality and justice. These are, in fact, campaign slogans, things that the three parties hammered away at. Cross-strait ties, and the question of whether or not a consensus exists between the mainland and Taiwan, and whether or not it's possible to even form a consensus about cross-straits relations within Taiwan. Some members of our panel are going to discuss this at length today. And also the question of integrity and fairness. This has to do with how the judiciary behaves. This has to do with charges of corruption. These came up during the campaign, including in the last weeks. In fact, in the last minutes almost of the campaign, some of the candidates brought up these kinds of issues. Also discussed was the question of outside influences. And here, the two influences most discussed were that of the mainland, and whether or not the mainland was contributing, was participating in the election in a particular way, and also whether or not the United States was trying to send signals as to how the people of Taiwan ought to vote. These were some of the issues. Now, I'll be really quite impressed if any of you can read this at this distance. This is a chart from the Mainland Affairs Council, which shows a series of polls taken in Taiwan to assess attitudes towards the relationship with China. I've already talked about the economic relationship. I've already shown you those slides. Let's talk a little bit about the relationship with China. And again, our other speakers will go into greater depth on this. The vast majority of people on Taiwan are content with the status quo. Asked what should be done, 1 out of 3 says nothing. Let's make a decision later. 1 out of 4 says let's just keep it this way indefinitely. And then you have something like 28% of the population that says they want independence or they want unification with the mainland, but not now, not now, sometime, some indeterminate time later. Very few people in Taiwan call for independence now, and almost no one calls for unification. This is the context in which these issues, this campaign took place. And so none of the candidates was pushing for independence. None of the candidates was pushing for unification. The candidates, however, had different ideas about the pace at which the relationship between the mainland and Taiwan should continue to progress. Now, one of the concerns here one of the concerns in the election was the question of bribery. And so here you've got a message, don't bribe, don't sell your vote, and various things, ways to do this. And helpfully, you've got a phone number to call if you know somebody's being bribed or somebody's carrying out bribes. This was in all the newspapers on behalf of the government of Taiwan. Nonetheless, there were some reports of vote buying. But for the most part, the campaign progressed as most campaigns do. It was fought out on television through these debates, but mostly through television commercials. I collected about 30 of these commercials, and I'd love to share them with you if we had enough time. Some are quite clever, some are animated, some focus on particular issues that a candidate is speaking to. Others don't involve the candidate at all. In addition to these campaign commercials that were created by the campaigns, you also had, shall we say, public service announcements created by ordinary people to pound home certain messages. I can't afford a house. I don't have a job. These kinds of things. You also saw the campaigns using a huge variety of products to advertise their message and also to raise money. And so the campaigns sold different things. This is the some of the items available from the Democratic Progressive Party. Now you could wear this scooter helmet, of course, and protect your skull. And it's appropriately a bright color so that hopefully you won't get hit. But you also have an iPhone holder, you've got buttons, you've got water, you've got tissues, every kind of thing imaginable. And the same was true on the Kuomintang side. On the Kuomintang side, they had all sorts of t-shirts and that sort of thing. And I think you'll get to see some of that a little bit later. Here are water bottles. And these water bottles are in the shape of the thumbs up, okay, we are good to go sort of thing, again from the Kuomintang. You have other kinds of things. So you had the opportunity, you too could take your picture with Ma Ying-jeou, the president. The campaign slogan, of course, was Taiwan Jiayou, which means really add oil, go faster, but it's translated officially by the campaign as Taiwan Bravo. Taiwan Bravo. And they had rallies. Taiwan is famous for its political rallies. With my colleagues, we visited a couple of these rallies in Taichung, a key battleground city. And this is a photograph I took there of the Kuomintang rally. And I took this particular photograph to indicate how organized the Kuomintang was, because I think that was an important difference in this election. Party mobilization, party organization. They brought in people on buses, they sat in rows, they had it all laid out. It was a highly efficient mobilization. And it was entertaining. I'm not quite sure what these popular singers and dancers had to say about politics, but I certainly enjoyed the show, as did others, And yes, there's video if anyone's interested. What's interesting is you had a lot of people speak on the substance of the issues, but the folks that were put in charge of getting the crowd pumped up just before the man himself, just before Ma Ying-jeou comes up, these dancers. Okay, they knew what would get the audience, get the audience moving. And then Ma Ying-jeou comes forward. Now, I unfortunately have not included, I have a whole series of photographs as well as commercials featuring Ma Ying-jeou's wife. She's the secret weapon. And I'm not just calling her that, the Taiwan news organizations called her that. Because she was brought into the campaign in early December. And suddenly there were a flurry of ads or reports suggesting that maybe Ma Ying-jeou's campaign was in trouble. If they were going to Zhou Meiqing that early, if they were going to his wife that early, maybe he was going to lose. In any case, she's phenomenally popular, and they had her in a number of different settings. So here we have the rally, and you can see how excited people get. You see, of course, the flag of Taiwan at these rallies and at the People First Party. You don't see the flag of Taiwan very often at the Democratic Progressive Party. The reason for that, of course, is that the Guomindang, the party flag, is a part of the national flag. Here, Ma Ying-jeou calls for Taiwan's golden decade to come and his plans for it. Other campaigns proceeded similarly. Banners, of course, everywhere. Every street corner is covered with them. Here, people are talking. These are people that were quite interesting because two of these folks ultimately decided to vote for Ma Ying-jeou, even though they're at the rally for James Soong. They wanted to show respect for him. Who else showed up at the rally? The Chiang Kai-shek look-alike. I was fascinated by this, caught him mid-bite, and he, of course, is quite cognizant that he looks like Chiang Kai-shek, and he's not just a hanger-on because at the end of the rally, when James Soong gets on the stage, guess who's right next to him? Now, this is really quite striking because no other political figure in Taiwan would choose to have somebody remind the audience of Chiang Kai-shek, okay, who, of course, was the dictator who ruled Taiwan from 1949 until his passing in 1975. Quite an interesting choice. The Tsai campaign, we'll go through a couple of slides of this, emphasized a few themes. One of them was that she was the first female candidate for president. Taiwan is ahead of the United States. They've had a female vice president, and a major party nominated a woman as president. So you can see here, Taiwan, the first female president, Tsai Ing-wen. Also, what was different in this campaign were the colors. In Taipei and in most of Taiwan, the Democratic Progressive Party did not emphasize the color green, which is very much associated with the party and associated with independence, the independence plank of the Democratic Progressive Party platform. Here we have three different colors, one of them green, but also red and yellow, which were used by the Democratic Progressive Party campaign. The Democratic Progressive Party campaign, the big item were the little piggies. And maybe Stan or one of our other speakers can go into some depth on this. It was a brilliant response. One of the things that came up was these three individuals, three children wanted to donate money. They brought the money in little piggy banks, and they were then, found to have violated the law, because unless you can vote, unless you're 20 years old and a Taiwan citizen, you have no business donating to any campaign. And so this provided a spark, a movement was born, and the Democratic Progressive Party rode it and rode it hard. Altogether, 143,000 little piggies were donated, were collected. And you can see it became the theme for the campaign vehicles. Here the piggy front of the truck and the piggy back of the truck. Here is a collection of some of those 143,000 little piggies. And here are little piggies turned into an angry bird, one of the other campaign themes used by the Democratic Progressive Party. Here you've got thousands of these piggy banks used to form the map of Taiwan. And above the map you have the Gongping Zhengyi, the slogan for the Democratic Progressive Party campaign calling for fairness and justice. Here is after a rally. We're about to finish. Here's after a rally in Taichung. We all need to eat. But the high moment for the Democratic Progressive Party campaign was when former President Lee Teng-hui joined Tsai Ing-wen on the platform in the rally just before the election. He had already endorsed Tsai Ing-wen. But he was too sick, it was said, to do so publicly. But then he came forward. And this, of course, attracted a lot of attention, excited many. People came back to Taiwan. I flew from Los Angeles next to people who were flying to Taiwan to vote. We met a student from University of California, Berkeley, flew back to vote. Hundreds of thousands of people went to vote, including from the mainland. Here, the message is, get a train ticket and go and vote. Okay. This is a picture of Senator Frank Murkowski, who made a comment at as part of his observation of the election. We'll perhaps talk about that a little bit later. Let's go to the polls. First, we got to line up. We have to show our ID, make sure that we're on the voter rolls. Then we go in, and all of us who have voted in the United States, this is very familiar, you go in. The difference here is that there were 3 ballots, one for the presidency, one for the local district election, and then one for a party preference. Our later speakers will be discussing how those votes turned out. At 4 o'clock, the doors were shut, everything was shuffled around, and the votes were counted. The votes in Taiwan are counted publicly. And so each vote is pulled out, each ballot is pulled out, and it's read, and observers monitor it. As it happens, the woman on the left made a mistake while she was reading. She spent the next 15 minutes apologizing to the observers, because here they are. Some of them have computers, they're recording every vote. Others, you can see the fellow in the center, has a video camera, he's recording every vote. The ballots are held up, the results are announced, and then they're, well, in some cases, they're invalidated. This vote didn't count. The person had not properly stamped it, and the election official, the election volunteer, is showing it to the observers to make sure that they concur. Here the votes are tallied, okay, one by one. And then that information is sent to the Central Election Commission and broadcast on television. So here are a couple screenshots from television broadcasts within a few minutes of each other, how the vote was going. This is pretty much how it came down. The tallies are a little bit different, but roughly 52% to 45, 46%, and James Soong never cracked 3%. This is how it ends at the rally for Ma Ying-jeou in front of campaign headquarters. He comes out, says some things. Later he goes inside. It's pouring rain at this point. And he's answering various questions. But Apple Daily is quick on the scene. They have pictures from the rally and distribute this newspaper at the rally. Many people wound up using it to keep the rain off their heads. But there are a few who had other uses for it. At the Tsai Ing-wen rally, it was not so joyous. Here, somebody's calling on her to win. Didn't end up that way, but you can see it's pouring down rain. She speaks quite movingly, and many of her many of her observers are really, really quite downcast. The next day, the Apple Daily has this picture, which I think summarizes a lot of things. The power, the depiction, and we'll have Stan Rosen talk about the advertising a little bit. Here is Ma Ying-jeou and his wife, Zhou Meiqing, victory. But I'm ending with this image, because some in Taiwan concluded that this was a victory not just for Ma Ying-jeou, not just for the Kuomintang, but for the 1992 consensus. Now, what this consensus refers to is the idea that both governments on the two sides of the Taiwan Straits agree that there is one China, but disagree about the nature and extent of that China. And that's what several of our speakers are going to talk about next. Thank you.